And I'd like to welcome everybody today to this podcast and especially my guest, Sharla Zwirek. Hi, Sharla.
Hi, Nora. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And I'm really glad to be able to talk to you today. Our relationship in the publishing world has been an extraordinary, rich experience for me. And I really appreciate your being here on the podcast to talk about yourself, your insights, as well as some of the aspects of having been in educational publishing. So thanks in advance.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'd also like to reflect back to you, Nora, the um, what I've learned from you over the years. I've learned a tremendous amount about what's happening in classrooms, especially in high schools across the country, in world languages, how teachers are thinking about things, how supervisors are thinking about things, and sort of to keep me on track in terms of what's going to work in classrooms for teachers and students.
Well, thank you for saying that, Charla. So let's start with that then. What have you found that's been especially intriguing to you or potentially new or reaffirm things that you thought you knew, but it was neat to receive an extra boost in that understanding? Reflect on those experiences, please.
Well, I think that some of the things that we've worked on where I really appreciated your feedback was when we were choosing third party material, so short clips from the TV or short films, to really get a sense of, we think this is good. We think that this would be stimulating for teachers and students to learn, but to get a sense for how the larger community may react to certain pieces of content, especially considering, in publishing as we do, we have to consider 50 states and the entire public. So we're publishing for the whole country, and probably other parts of the world as well. I believe Canada also uses quite a few of the materials I've worked on, and American and military schools around the world. But to make sure that we're getting content to students that is intriguing to them, but also going to be um, widely used in classrooms across the country.
It's interesting so that there are variations.
Well, I think that when you're talking about particularly K-12 publishing, um, that there are different mores and issues that teachers are and are not willing to talk about in the classroom.
Hmm.
And so we have, as educational material developers, we do some self-censoring to make sure that we are hitting the most middle of the road as possible, in terms of topics that we cover. However, in some of the conversations I've been having recently, I'm finding that the current climate is really opening up some conversations that may not have been what we deemed acceptable in the past around, um, for example, poverty. One of the things that we, as a publisher, we
Hmm.
tended not to show poverty in Latin America because we wanted to show the best of those worlds, to invite students to want to engage with those cultures. But now that we are really having some conversations around accessibility and equity in the United States, and especially in K-12 publishing, I think that some people are changing their minds about what is acceptable and not to include in mainstream educational material. And I think that's a real healthy conversation for us to be having, um, as curriculum developers, as the material that we develop is used by millions of students over the course of many years.
It's interesting. And to ask a question that's a little bit provocative, sometimes folks think of publishers as producing materials that are designed very middle of the road so as to be able to get large numbers of sales. And you are looking at something that you have expressed in the direction of not about like, okay, let's get more sales, but rather the sensitivities or the approaches of the populations have changed. Some of the things that they're willing or interested in looking at. Can you take a look at, balance those two aspects, or take us on a path of your understanding of opening it up, for example, in this new direction?
Well, I want to also go back and say that in any case, in terms of materials that I've worked on, and the collaborative ventures I've been on, everyone cares most deeply about having high quality, interesting materials for students. So that's never been something that we have shied away from, or we always want the best quality. And yes, publishing is a business, so yes, there is an aspect of wanting to get some additional sales. Um, and there are people on, both sides of the spectrum who will be interested or not interested in a product based on what is or what is not included. So I know that at one point, the Archdiocese of Georgia sent out a letter to all of um, to their community saying, do not purchase this particular textbook because of the portrayal of a priest in one of the authentic materials,
Mm.
to the standards that are coming out in California now, where they are expecting to see coverage of the LGBTQ plus community in all of their materials. They want to see positive reinforcement of that community. So as someone who is developing materials for the entire country, you need to balance the people who don't want to see anything other than heteronormative material to people who expect to see a much wider variety of family constructions, and try to please everyone in something that is still high interest and meaningful to students, that allow teachers in their classrooms to have the discussions that they and their students are comfortable having, while not compromising the quality of the overall product that one is developing at the time.
Quite a balancing act.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, in general, I think that educational publishers do quite a good job, and actually they are buffeted by activists, in again, on both sides. I know for many years it was very difficult for the social studies teams to pass the certain boards of education, and activists who really wanted a particular view of U.S. history um, demonstrated in their books. And in some cases, you get products that are developed for a particular state to meet that, either the standards that they have that are special, or a constituency that insists on having a certain viewpoint. Um, I don't think that people like getting pushed around like that, but sometimes big states do, and their constituents do influence the material that appear for their students.
Absolutely can understand that. One of the things that you provided to me as a specific statement was about the belief that you have about improving understanding between individuals and across cultures. And while we can understand and are about to address how materials can do that, how your commitment in the area of publishing and other areas as well can do that, you've actually touched upon it a bit here too, with the understanding between individuals and across cultures, just to address what materials and content folks are willing to accept.
Absolutely. I think that the conversation is, well, for me, it's been centered around learning Spanish, traveling to Spanish speaking countries, and really exploring those cultures. And then throughout my career, working on other language materials, and learning more about French speaking cultures and German speaking cultures, to have that opportunity to inspect cultural products, practices, and perspectives, whether it's within our own country, but to use that lens to think about how culture affects language, how culture affects life, and to use that sensitivity to help understand both other people within our own culture and in other cultures as well, to have an openness of mind to listen to another point of view, to see how someone else does things that are perhaps unexpected, to the way that you've been raised and the way you've lived your life, and to realize that that's okay, that's interesting. You may or may not want to do things in that particular way, but it helps you accept them and understand them better, so that you can have a dialogue about whatever you want to talk about life, about culture, about arts, about politics, about all sorts of things.
It's a very broad perspective that you just described there. How did you come about that perspective? What's in your own background and experiences that led you to such an insightful comment as you just made?
Well, I grew up with my father's an immigrant from the Netherlands, and so I grew up in a family where there were conversations at family reunions that I did not understand because I was English monolingual. Um, and my
Mm,
father's sister married a Mexican man, and they chose to raise their family in Mexico. So I have Spanish speaking Mexican cousins. And when I was presented with a choice of languages when I entered junior high, I chose Spanish because Dutch was not offered. Um, and so from there, that has sort of led me on a path to understand my own family, to have a better communication among, my cousins, my extended family, and then that just took me one step after the other to continuing with my Spanish studies, spending a semester abroad in Spain, and then deciding that working with Spanish was important to me, and I was going to wanted it to be part of my career. So I made the decision to live in Spain after I graduated from college, and that led me back when I came back to the United States to a conversation with a good friend of mine from college who said, "Hey, I'm an editorial assistant at McGraw-Hill Higher Ed in San Francisco. We have an opening. Are you interested?"
interesting.
And that was my first step into the publishing world. Um, and so I've always felt very strongly about education as a tool to change lives. And so here was an opportunity to combine my love of language, my love of education, with a career in the for-profit world, which was where I felt I belonged in terms of my long-term career. So it was a great stepping stone, and it's just grown from there.
Do you remember some of your first impressions when coming into an editorial environment, worldview? Some of the things that struck you as different than anything you had expected? And do you have any insights for others that don't know the publishing world as well?
Let's see. I mean, the first um, item that occurs to me is I was working on a program called Bravo, and it was for the high school Spanish language market. And I recall the photo editor having a list of all of the different types of people that needed to be represented in that textbook. So, and again, we're talking textbook. So I don't think we had a lot of video at that point. We had audio, of course, but not a lot of video. Um, to make sure that when we were doing our photo selection, that we had a certain coverage of all of the different ethnicities of folks in the United States. I think in particular looking at the California standards. So there's one person who, with a team, who's in charge of helping to research, select all of the photos to make sure that they match the content that the team wants to represent, and that they are of high quality, and that they also show a diversity of students in the United States, um, to the students so that students can see themselves. And I think, what we talked about a few minutes ago with the California standards, there's a real emphasis on, in the new California standards, on students being able to see themselves when they look at educational materials, so that they, as one of the consultants there said, how long does a student have to wait to see someone that looks like them?
Oh,
So I think that, you know now people are spending even more time trying to make sure that we get those balance right, so that students are seeing themselves in the material.
how do you relate the experience that you had with seeing a person that was that specialized in their focus as a contributor and connect it to the very strong impulse that is in education right now, world language education right now, of finding one's own content in the vast digital array that's out there on the internet?
Well, um, I think it may be that people do not see the large team of people who spend a tremendous amount of time looking for, researching, evaluating material that goes into the educational products that are available right now. We have, you know, third-party material research who research print, who research audio, who research film. Um, there are content editors, there are writers, authors, there are photo editors, there are rights and permissions specialists, there are production specialists, project managers, video specialists, audio specialists, a whole technology team, depending on the product, who are building the product on the technology side. So it may not be as visible to folks that this is a whole group of people who are firmly committed to providing the best material that they possibly can to teachers and students. And I think for the individual teacher who wants to go out and search for his or her own material, I think they quickly find how time consuming it is.
Hmm.
It takes time to find the right audio, video, piece of literature, article on a particular theme that a teacher wants to focus on in the classroom. And then once you've found that great piece of material, for a publisher needs to make sure to clear rights to be able to use that in their material. So we don't have a way around just making a copy or sending a link. We need to get permission to use that material. And then we need to write all of the scaffolding around it. So what is the vocabulary that the students need to know? What is the grammar they need to know? What are how do you get them interested in it? How do you activate prior knowledge? Do the pre-work, before you do this, while you do this, after you do this. And then always thinking about, the ACTFL 5Cs. What are we trying to get students to work on? Thinking about the modes of communication, making sure that we're focusing on interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, as well as scaffolding the material so that students start from more concrete tasks and then move them through more open-ended tasks where they are producing their own material and, as much as possible, leading them to personalize how they respond to particular topics so that they really bring the topic and the information home and relate it to their own lives. There's been a real push recently in terms of focusing on interculturality, so getting students to think about their own culture. And as Parthena Dragitt mentioned to me when we were working on the first edition of Temas and the cultural comparisons question, she said, a lot of students don't even know that they have a culture.
Yeah.
So you have to get students
Yeah.
to think about what is my culture, and then think about, how is this different from what I just learned, and how do I compare those and make meaning from that comparison. So I think that's a really powerful thing that we can do with educational materials. And again, we have a whole team of people who are thinking about this: reading, writing, rewriting, editing, making sure that the content is as good as possible, but also is hitting all of these different other expectations that educators have about the materials that they want to be using in their classrooms.
You've just expressed a great complexity of contributions there, all on behalf of accomplishing that educational task, and thank you for it. And you referred to a material that you worked with Parthena Dragitt on, which is Temas. Can you describe a little bit that particular title so that listeners know what you're referring to, but also then broaden it out? What are some of the other languages and language groupings that you've had an opportunity to contribute towards?
Sure, Nora. um, Temas is a product that was developed at Vista Higher Learning for teaching, for preparing students for the AP Spanish language and culture examination. The exam changed in 2014, so there was a rush at a few different publishing houses to take a look at the new exam and change the materials that were provided to educators and students so they could get ready for the new exam and so students could be prepared. So working with a team of authors, and Parthena was the lead author on that team, um, coming up with a structure that would allow students to to cover the six contexts and the six themes and the related contexts that the College Board had provided for the language and culture exam, and those language and culture exams are now standardized across the modern language exams, um, and to also fulfill the focus that the College Board and the industry in general was moving toward using authentic material. And in the case of AP, they also wanted to focus more on journalism. So it's a sort of a move away from literature as the primary written input, and to literature, and an emphasis as well on authentic audio. So the team came up with a structure that included several readings on most of the contexts that were provided by the College Board, with an audio and a cultural comparison of each context.
Uh-oh.
Okay, well, thanks for asking. I think that the TEMAS project was um, a fascinating project to work on, and we really focused on the requirements of the change, the updated AP Spanish language and culture exam, focused on using authentic material as inputs for the interpretive piece of language in written form, audio, as well as short film.
Mm-hmm.
We pulled together the cultural comparisons, and as Parthena Draggett, one of the co-authors, mentioned to me, was we need to ask students to think about their own culture, to reflect on what their own culture is before they can compare it to
Yeah.
another culture,
Yeah.
and then get them to be thinking about the intercultural and cultural connections to get to those perspectives. Um, so the program was developed in a relatively short period of time because we really wanted to get it into classrooms in time for teachers and students to use it for the new exam. It was a very rewarding development process with a great team of people, great contributors, great authors, great editors, um, and we brought it out in time for students and teachers to be using it in their classes. It is a basal textbook, it's not a test prep, so it's really meant to get students thinking and talking about all of the themes and contexts that are provided by the College Board. Um, and we had the great satisfaction of hearing back from teachers that they and their students really enjoyed using the textbook, and also that their students were having great success on the exam. So that was very gratifying. Um, Another thing I just wanted to mention about that, about materials development, is
Uh-huh.
when the first year of that the program was in classrooms, we started getting feedback through from the field that teachers were saying, "It's November and I'm still in theme one. We'll move on." Um, Part of what we try to do as curriculum developers is to provide a wealth of material so that teachers and students can focus on what's interesting to them. Teachers are teaching the same course over multiple years can go back and forth and choose one thing one year, one another. And especially for AP language students, where it's really a focus on what's happening today, teachers have the freedom to bring in a current event that we couldn't possibly have foreseen 18 months before, and they can focus the conversation of their students on something that really matters to them and what will get students talking.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of fun, just a great team. Um, so, but that's just one example of the material I've worked on. I've worked on Spanish, French, German, a little bit of Italian. And then I've also been involved in projects for Chinese and American Sign Language. We were researching a project for learning American Sign Language and or teaching and learning American Sign Language, and I had my eyes open to a culture that exists within the boundaries of the United States that I had very little awareness of, and
Hmm, interesting.
it was fascinating to investigate and learn about the deaf perspective and on how they communicate, learning how American Sign Language is really quite complex, and it has a complete language, and it only was recognized as such fairly recently in the latter half of the 20th century, and how the deaf community has been fighting for their rights for inclusion. So accessibility, inclusion are and equity are topics that are hot in the educational world right now, and
Hmm.
many of them are the result of deaf activists. And I really encourage people who don't know that much about the deaf community in the United States to spend some time researching it, even just a couple of articles, just to open up your mind to and your hearts to a community that is is right next door, and they very much want to be part of our society, and we should be making it available to them. Um, so that was just really a
Interesting.
great example of the way that working in educational publishing allows me to continue learning every day, and that's something that's always kept me going, is that trying to incorporate the most recent events, whether they're political, artistic um, events. It just keeps you on your toes and interested in investigating the world around us, so that we can bring that in and provide it in a with a with pedagogy that's well scaffolded for teachers and students to use for learning and discussion.
You've been continuing to talk, Charla, so beautifully about this improving understanding between individuals and across cultures. And here you've brought in the deaf community and the culture that's engaged with the deaf community as well as part of that understanding. Thank you for doing that.
I learned so much, Nora, doing this research, and um, really saw how people that a community in this country that really was invisible to me. I haven't lived with anyone who communicated as a native of American Sign Language. They are very much part of our community. And one of the statistics I read that I thought was fascinating is that up to 15% of US citizens will experience hearing loss in their lifetime.
Wow,
And so the ability to open ourselves up to American Sign Language as a way of either incorporating people who are born deaf or people who experience hearing loss later in life, and then to think about what that community needs as they interact with the hearing community, and that we as hearing people, as I've worked for all hearing companies, to make sure that our material is accessible to that community, so that marketing videos always have captions. Just some very simple things that a hearing company or hearing people don't necessarily think about are critical to the ability of deaf individuals to access um, material. And then I experienced in reverse when I was doing video, researching videos from the deaf community. The videos that don't have captions are unintelligible to me.
yeah,
So it's fascinating to find this community, and I'd love for all of us to make an effort to find them, make them feel welcome, and build these cultural bridges within the confines of our own national borders.
that's very cool. And I have to add that that's one reason why I've committed to the captioning of these podcasts. I, that accessibility issue touched me deeply, in large part because of the insights that you had been providing and when we were working together in a publishing company. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I'm going to the word that you used, Charla, about invisibility. Language and cultural studies. Talk a little bit more. Who else? is invisible, potentially, that can be revealed through the study of language and culture?
Well, the first thing that occurs to me are speakers of other languages who are in U.S. schools. I think that there has been a larger push in more recent years to provide programs, but in many states, even when I lived in California, there was um, a proposition that said that the schools needed to be English only. And I think that does a disservice to a large number of students because they aren't learning English in the same way that English speaking households are in the United States. And they need additional support to learn what we call academic language so that they understand the directions that are in their textbooks, they understand the directions that their teachers are giving them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also the confidence to be able to communicate in a classroom, an English speaking classroom. So I think that having teachers, especially of well, I guess all students, but I was thinking especially younger students, to make sure that those students have access to the tools that they need to bridge the gap, the language gap between their home culture, their home language, and a school in the United States. Because it's possible, I think that good teachers are going to say, well, I do that, and I bet they do it, but it's possible for teachers with large classes and a lot of demands to perhaps not focus on those children's needs, especially if they're in an area that does not provide some sort of additional support for English learners in those classrooms. And I think we could be missing students who have a lot to contribute to this this society, this community, by not giving them the educational opportunities that they deserve.
It's interesting. I had almost an image of the fact that if folks have different, say, nutritional needs or sensitivities, that we put in our refrigerator different types of foods to be able to address those nutritional needs, and that sometimes published materials are then being able to be provided in order to fulfill the educational nutritional needs
Mm-hmm.
of specialized populations so that educators are not overwhelmed by the diversity within their classroom from the point of view of providing appropriate content.
Well, you know, Nora, that especially in K-12 materials, that often publishers provide robust teachers' editions in which many of the tips that are included or information or additional tasks are there to help teachers with populations with different needs. So to help English learners in many classrooms to provide connections to native speakers of a language, to break students up into kids who don't do as well with words on the page, and to get them talking or playing, to engage students in different ways. So that's something that all all good publishers do. And you know, the wealth of material in most programs, you know, across all disciplines for K-12, I think sometimes is overwhelming for teachers, that it takes them a couple of years to figure out everything that's available to them
Mm-hmm.
and then to incorporate it into the classroom. And I think that teachers go and find it when they find that they have particular needs in their classroom. So, oh, you know, the student needs this kind of help. I wonder if the publisher has something like that. And maybe they do. Or it's something that they develop themselves, or they advocate for finding additional help within their district or their school to help their students.
Thanks for explaining that. Now, here's a question about, as a person who has been dedicated within the publishing arena for world languages, specifically for these years that you have, what kind of legacy are you looking to leave?
Well, I like to think that my legacy it lives in the people I've worked with, especially the more junior staff that I've worked with, that they can, you know, bring what they've learned from me, from my colleagues, and continue to develop um, great materials for teachers and students to be learning every day. Um, I am very proud of the Temas project. I think that was well, it's sort of my favorite project of all time. So,
Uh-huh.
and the fact that it was so well received by teachers and students, and the feedback that students get fours and fives when they're in those classrooms, really has it makes me feel quite good about it.
Yeah, cool.
Um, and let me see, it was no, that, and I just would like people to continue to be curious about your own world, be curious about other worlds, and um, learn about other people. I think that you gain so many insights into another culture if you speak that language. There's traveling is one thing. Traveling while speaking the language and being able to interact with folks on their own terms in their own language does give you insights that you wouldn't get even if they are speakers of English. People are themselves when they're speaking their own language in a way that they aren't when they're speaking a second language. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that it gives you a personal connection to folks in other countries when you allow them to be themselves, their authentic selves, and I think you learn more from them in those cases.
So that sounds like an invitation to those who've been listening to this podcast then. Be curious, be open, huh?
Yes, absolutely. That's I started this journey um, many years ago in junior high with the desire of learning more and connecting and communicating better with my own cousins. But I think that it just as time has passed, it just has grown to include a much wider piece of the world as it does as one grows and matures.
Uh,
Um, Go ahead.
No, no, please finish your thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having that ability to speak another language allows people to be more open to other people and to new experiences. And sort of to tie it together with something we were saying earlier, is that also, as you don't have to go out very far to find people who may have different language or different experiences. And in this time of misunderstandings at the national level, I think that even having that opportunity to be open to our neighbors, and to have conversations so that we can come to understand each other, could be a path to a more understanding and more peaceful world.
That's an intercultural understanding that might be happening right around our
Yeah,
neighborhoods,
exactly.
uh, linguistic as well. Charlotte, thank you for such a thoughtful conversation today and really appreciate your sharing your experiences, your thoughts, your background, and your commitment with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nora, for inviting me, and you're welcome.
And I wish you the very best as you continue to bring that opening to the world to people. And so, looking forward to seeing what the future will bring and to celebrating your legacy in the future as well.
Thank you, Nora.
Do take care.
All right. Bye bye.